Okay, so I'm going to do a real fun cupcake today. It's a really good introduction into the subject of still life. It's a bit more interesting than the usual fruit, and it can be quite colourful. So you're going to draw out this cupcake. I shall pop a photograph enlarged of my drawing and of the photograph itself on the screen, so you can screenshot them and print them out if you want to. So I'm going to go straight into the painting. What I will say is when you're drawing out, remember to get that curve at the bottom. You need that to curve round. I've got a selection of colours here. The first thing I'm going to do is pop on what I call some underpainting. So I'm going to come over the whole of the cupcake and the background. This is my wash brush. I'm using Saunders Waterford rough paper today and some Cotman watercolour paints, which I'll go through the colours as I apply them. So underpainting gives you a little bit of a background and it gives you a little bit of atmosphere. So I've got a round number 10. I'm going to dab in to some water and then into some raw sienna. And I'm just going to bring that loosely across. So a slightly off vertical stripe. What's quite good about this photograph is it's got quite a good indication of where the light's coming from, which is what you need when you're doing still life, and where the shadow is going to be. Rinse my brush out, load the brush up again with water, and this is Permanent Rose. Now it can be quite vibrant, don't worry. Just blend it through. Load my brush up, dab in. And blend that through. Rinse my brush out, loaded it up again, and I'm going to take a tiny bit of ultramarine. So this is ultramarine blue. And just bring that through as well. What I want you to be careful of with the ultramarine blue is that you don't go into this sort of creamy icing colour. So you can go into the background, you can go into the raspberry with it, but you're going to avoid the creamy icing colour. You can come into the shadow. So that's a really nice bit of underpainting there, so I'm going to dry that off. Okay, so that's nicely dry, and I'm going to start to come into the cupcake itself now. So I have got a pea-sized blob of raw sienna and about half a teaspoon of water. That's a little bit light, so I'm going to pop a little bit more in. That's better. A couple of dabs of the water again, and then I'm going to take a blob of burnt sienna in. Okay. So we're going to come on to the cupcake itself, and we're going to do the sponge bit. So I'm taking a little bit of water on with my round number 10. And I'm going to come in with the raw sienna. If you can see the tip of your brush, you can see where it's going to go. So you're going to get a nice edge on that icing. And a nice edge on the cupcake here. on this side. I'm going to dab into some of the burnt sienna. Because this cupcake has got quite a lot of warmth. I'm just going to pop some of that on. Now, if you turn your brush upside down, you can go into those little triangles that are forming the edge of the cupcake case. That's a really good tip. And just do those quite easily like that. I'll just rinse that brush off and pop it to one side. I'm going to get around number 6 now, so I want to add a little bit more shadow. And I've got this ultramarine here, which I'm just going to dab into a separate well, and a little bit of burnt umber. Mixing those together, you want a little bit, they will make a black, but you want basically a dark brown. So I have got a dark brown here, and then I can come in whilst this is still wet and just get those little bits of edges. So around number 6 means you're in much more control of that colour. If you're worried about it running too much, dab off onto the kitchen towel a little bit. And this is going to really bring out that icing colour. Now you don't have to go everywhere with that shadow. I don't want to follow all that line all the way round, because that will end up looking false. So it's just popping where the shadow is. It's a little bit of shadow where the cupcake's indented there. And there's a little bit of shadow just very close to the edge of the case. So because this is all still damp, I can just go along and just dab in. So you're just looking for a really nice edge this side and this side, because that's going to form the light of the icing. With that round number 6 still, I'm going to let that settle in. And I'm going to come on to this raspberry. So this is a little bit of water going on first. I've got a little bit of rose here. Now if you get odd bits that are dry, that's great because it works as a highlight. If you don't worry, you can always add a highlight in later. You can see those odd little bits that I'm leaving as highlights. Now I'm going to dab with a loaded brush into the cadmium red deep. So this is just going to give it a bit more of a raspberry colour. So So I've got a bit of two tones happening in there. Then I'm not going to rinse my brush out, and I'm just going to dip into a little bit of the ultramarine blue. So I need to get that dark shadow again, and it's right down this bottom section. So just where it's entering into the icing. So I'm just going to come along this bottom edge. That's going to give a real sense of it going into that icing. Little raspberries just with the cadmium red, so I'll do a bit of both. So I'm just dabbing on to define some of these little berries within the berry. It's very easy when you're doing something like this to get bogged down and think you need all the detail in there, and you actually don't. That fine, delicate, bubbly effect would do. If you want a bit more definition, then you can just come in over that. And I'm just creating really little half circles. Just builds the raspberry surface up a lot more. Try to get over this bluer area at the bottom. And let that one dry a little bit. So with this mix of ultramarine and burnt umber, I've got this nice dark brown, and I can come in to start on the cake case. So I'm going to come on to this with my round number 6, and I'm going to work dry. And what I'm going to do is pull out the dark bits. Only the dark bits. The beauty of watercolour is you can layer. So we're going to do this, and then we're going to layer over the top to get that depth. So I'm picking out those dark creases. Artistic license is a wonderful thing as well. Don't think you've got to get every single one. A few dark creases will do. If you're more comfortable with the smaller brush, you could go down a little bit smaller. But around number 6 is a good one to be using for this. Got some darker bits just at the edge here as well. I'm just going to pick those out. Make sure you've got right the way to where you need to on that bottom of the edge of the case as well, and at the top. So you might find that you've got some bits that are darker, a few little bits that are darker there as well. So I shall let that bit dry. Alright, so if we come on to the shadow. Let's do a bit of the shadow next. So that's going to really ground our cupcake. So I'm going to use a little bit of the rose straight onto dry. My brush is loaded with water before I'm going on here. The shadow expands out, so you need plenty on there to get this on quickly. And then with my round number 6, I'm going to dip into the ultramarine blue. I'm going to come along the bottom edge of the cupcake case. Just take some of this a little bit further through. I'm dipping my brush into some raw sienna. I'm just going to start to get a little bit more detail onto the icing. So I'm really looking where it's slightly darker, but not so much the shadow. Just tonally, the icing needs to have a little bit more colour in places, but not everywhere. It's naturally going to be darker this side because the shadow is going to be there. Okay, I'm going to dry that off now. Okay, so that's nicely dry. I've got this same dark brown mix of burnt sienna and ultramarine blue. And what I'm going to do now is start to come over the cupcake case. Those layers will come through, and I might end up doing another layer over this to make it stronger. Now, if you are really careful, you can leave odd tiny little bits of white where the highlights are on the case. It's just a case of just leaving it dry. It's quite tricky though, so don't worry if you don't get it. A white pen at the end, a white gel pen, is a wonderful thing if you just want to get a few highlights. I'm just going to try and leave a little bit of a highlight there, but I'm basically going over all of those lines again. I'm using my round number 10, but I can swap down to my round number 6 if I've got trickier areas to do. You want a nice edge at the bottom. Make sure you've got into these areas at the top as well. Just leaving that odd highlight here and there is fine. If you start to get a line like this is because it's drying quicker in one place and not another. You just need to take a little bit more paint just across that, just to even it out. Not water, paint. So with that same shadow colour, I'm going to come into the cupcake icing now. So this is that dark brown colour, I'm just using it very lightly. I'm just coming into where the indents are. So you get those little dark folds in the icing. There's actually not a huge amount really, because it is so light. You can rinse your brush off, dab it off so it's not too wet, and just soften some of those in a little bit if you want to, but they will work as quite thin dark lines as well. So if I come back into the cadmium red, I'm going to build up a few more now. It's just about building up those layers so you start to get that real pop and depth. Because you can achieve that with watercolour. So I've just dabbed in a few extra. I'm going to keep this side lighter. So I'm not going to take any more in that side because that's tonally helping that to work. I'm just going to take a little bit of the ultramarine blue. I just want a slightly greyer mix. And I'm going to come back underneath here just to get a little bit more shadow. Just under this cupcake, just finely on that edge. It just needs that little bit more shadow to ground it. I'll give it another. So I've dried that, and then I'm going to bring on another layer. So this is that same mix. The more layers you do of this now, the more that this will pop out. Can still try and leave an odd little bit of white. When you first put it on, it looks like you're not going to see those layers underneath, but I promise you they do come through. As it starts to dry, you do see them, and it's just giving it more and more depth. Every layer you put on just makes it pop that little bit more. This is called glazing. And then I'm going to do the same now with a permanent rose. Just bring that over just to glaze this a little bit more. So I want these to pop out and be really vibrant. So I'm just going to dry off, and then I'm going to do a background. Okay, so you can see now that cupcake is nicely dry, but you can see those layers in there. You can see how much this is popping out, and we just now need to join the shadow and the background together. So to do that, I'm going to use my wash brush, and I'm going to take some of that rose colour just over into some water. I don't want it to be too strong. I don't want it to compete with the shadow. But this is going to connect everything together. Okay, so I'm going to come on now, and this is actually called glazing, and I'm going to bring this round. I'm just going to glaze the background. So this is just going straight on with my wash brush, plenty of water, and I'm coming up to the cupcake. You'll still see those layers that I did at the very beginning, that underpainting as atmosphere. They'll still be there. They'll just come through underneath. Now you do need to work fairly quickly because you're coming on to dry, and I suggest you start one side and work your way round. Try and keep it even. You're basically just putting a layer all the way round, and this will help to connect it all together. Just make sure you've got into all of those edges nicely. And there we go. You've got a lovely cupcake. Okay, so that's nicely dried, and I'm just going to show you what you can achieve now with the white gel pen. Just in case you have lost your highlights, you can just come in and just lightly draw them on. I find a gel pen is better than any other highlighting pen sold for art. So this is just a stationary white gel pen. You can pick them up off Amazon, you can pick them up from a local stationer's. It's just perfect. It's just enough, those little highlights, and you can pop some little bits onto the highlights of the raspberries as well.